Chapter 181. After speaking with Paul, everything was finally done. The first year at Mythos Academy had drawn to a close, and I stood at the pinnacle. Sovereign. Rank 1. I had surpassed Lucifer Windward, outlasted Rinkagu, outdueled the prodigies of my year. The gap between me and the so-called untouchables had vanished, not by chance, but by effort, by sheer force of will. And yet, standing at the summit, I found myself staring into the distance rather than down at those I had surpassed. There were still questions. Too many, pressing at the edges of my mind. Why was I here? Why had I taken this body? What force had woven my existence into this world? I did not belong. And yet I was here. I was Arthur Nightingale. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I needed to move forward, to stop looking over my shoulder at the life I had left behind. Because Emma would have wanted me to. The Sovereign's Tournament was only the crown jewel of a much larger spectacle. The end-of-year festival, the grand conclusion to the academic cycle at Mythos Academy. An event of prestige and tradition, a final moment of levity before students dispersed for the summer. The festival was not open to the public, nor was it broadcasted to the world. Mythos Academy stood alone on its secluded island, a place of power and privilege where only the chosen walked. The world could only speculate, could only wait for the students who emerged, stronger, sharper, more prepared for whatever fate had in store for them. Within the academy, however, the festival was nothing short of spectacular. The stone courtyards, usually places of quiet discussion and hurried steps between lessons, had transformed into bustling avenues of lights, music, and energy. Stalls had been erected overnight, each run by students eager to showcase their talents or earn a few credits before the year ended. One section of the academy had become a marketplace, selling rare goods from distant lands, enchanted trinkets, carefully inscribed spell tomes, and weapons imbued with unique properties. Another section housed games of skill and magic, where students tested their abilities for sport rather than survival. Music spilled through the streets from makeshift stages where performers displayed their craft. Ethereal dancers moved in sync with floating ribbons of mana, instruments hummed with sound amplification magic, and illusionists wove dazzling scenes in the air, turning the very sky into a shifting tapestry of colors and constellations. Laughter and conversation blended into a chorus of life, an atmosphere so removed from the grueling battles of the past weeks that it almost felt like an entirely different world. And yet, despite the festivities, there was an unspoken reverence in the air. No one openly acknowledged it, but everyone knew there was a new sovereign. Rankings had shifted. The hierarchy had been rearranged. Arthur Nightingale now stood at the very top. But in this moment, among the lanterns and laughter, it almost felt like that didn't matter. Because for the first time in a long while, Mythos Academy was not a battlefield. It was a place of celebration. The festival was in full swing, a riot of colors, scents, and sounds that filled the isolated island of Mythos Academy with rare warmth. Lanterns floated lazily through the air, their soft glow adding to the almost dreamlike quality of the evening. Stalls lined the pathways, bursting with all manner of delights. Grilled skewers dripping with sauce, bubbling cauldrons of exotic drinks, shimmering enchanted trinkets promising fleeting bursts of luck. And at the heart of it all was us. Rachel, Serafina, Cecilia, Rose, and me. My family had left for Avalon earlier, leaving me to navigate the chaos of the festival with what could only be described as the four most contrasting personalities imaginable. Rachel, dressed in a casual t-shirt and jeans, had the confident ease of someone who had walked through 100 festivals before, her sapphire eyes scanning every stall like a seasoned connoisseur. She was in her element, keeping up an effortless flow of conversation, pausing only to dramatically recommend her favorite foods. Serafina, ever composed, walked beside her with an air of quiet detachment. She wore simple, elegant clothes, a flowing dark blouse and slacks, her silver hair catching the lantern light like moonlit silk. She had no real interest in the festival, but she wasn't against it either. She simply existed in the moment, observing everything with that sharp, analytical gaze of hers. Cecilia, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. If Rachel was navigating, and Serafina was observing, Cecilia was conquering. She strode ahead, her cropped top and shorts making it clear she cared more about comfort than anything else, her golden locks bouncing as she grabbed me by the wrist. "Come on, Arthur," she groaned, dragging me forward with surprising strength. "You move like an old man. If we're going to do this, we're doing it my way." I am walking, I pointed out. You're ambling, she corrected. We need to eat. Immediately. And then there was Rose. Sweet, gentle Rose, somehow both the youngest looking and the most mature among us. She had her own agenda, mainly consisting of scouting out any bookstalls tucked away in the festival's hidden corners. Cecilia, who had no patience for the refined art of wandering, led us straight to the food stalls, where Rachel promptly launched into a passionate speech about the superiority of a particular honey-filled pastry. You have to try this, she declared, handing me one. I bit into it, the warm, sweet filling melting on my tongue. It was unsurprisingly very good. Not bad, I admitted. Rachel grinned. Not bad? This is perfection. This is the best thing you'll eat all year. Serafina, who had been watching the entire ordeal in silence, finally spoke. You say that about everything you eat, Rachel. Rachel turned to her with a dramatic sigh. That's because I have taste. I appreciate the finer things in life. Serafina blinked, unimpressed. And yet, you still eat instant noodles when you're alone. Cecilia burst into laughter, while Rachel sputtered, trying to come up with a suitable defense. Rose, watching from the sidelines, simply smiled and took a slow sip from the manna-infused tea she had somehow acquired without anyone noticing. The banter carried on as we moved deeper into the festival. At some point, we found ourselves by a large fountain, taking a moment to breathe. The sounds of laughter and music filled the air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no tension, no battle to fight, no rankings to worry about, just us. So, I said, glancing at them, having fun. Rose's voice was gentle. It's nice. Nice. Cecilia scoffed. It's amazing. I love festivals. They have a kind of reckless charm, don't you think? Rachel stretched her arms above her head, looking perfectly content. I like the energy. Everyone's here to enjoy themselves. Serafina simply nodded, her ice-blue eyes reflecting the lantern light. Rachel suddenly perked up. Oh, we have to watch the fireworks. They're the best part. Fireworks? Serafina asked. I've never seen them before. Rachel gasped, placing both hands on Serafina's shoulders. You what? I've never seen them before, Serafina repeated, her tone neutral. Rachel shook her head in exaggerated despair. This is unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. Cecilia smirked. Looks like you're getting dragged into a new experience, Sarah. Serafina sighed but didn't protest. And so we made our way to the open field, where the crowd had already gathered. The night sky stretched endlessly above us, clear and dark, waiting. We sat down on the grass, close together, the warmth of the day still lingering in the air. Then, with a sharp crack, the first firework shot into the sky, bursting into a bloom of gold and silver. The crowd gasped, then cheered, the excitement contagious. Rachel nudged Serafina. Well, what do you think? Serafina's lips parted slightly as she watched the sky, her usual sharpness fading into something softer. It's beautiful. More fireworks followed, filling the sky with bursts of crimson, sapphire, emerald, each one illuminating our faces with its glow. The patterns grew more intricate, weaving together in perfect synchrony, an art form of light and magic. Rachel let out a breathless laugh. Told you they were good. Serafina just nodded, her gaze never leaving the sky. I leaned back on the grass, letting the world blur around me. There were no battles tonight.
No rankings. No burdens.
Just fireworks, laughter, and the quiet comfort of being surrounded by people who, in their own ways, made life brighter. The last firework exploded in a brilliant cascade of gold, lighting up the entire island before fading into the night. The crowd clapped and cheered, but we remained still, lost in the moment. Rachel stretched, sighing in satisfaction. That was even better than last year. We should do this every year, Rose said softly. Chapter 182. The festival had come to an end, but the island wasn't empty just yet. We still had a few days before summer break officially started, before we'd scatter across the world to return to our homes, our families, our separate lives, at least for a little while. For tonight, though, the four of them had come to my room. The academy wasn't particularly strict about things like this, despite what outsiders might assume. Mythos Academy fostered competition, talent, and ambition above all else. Whether it was training or socializing, they didn't care as long as you emerged stronger by the end of it. Rachel, Serafina, Cecilia, and Rose sat comfortably in my room, a mix of curiosity and expectation in their gazes. "So, Arthur." Rachel was the first to speak, her voice carrying that distinct lilt of amusement she always had when she was about to tease me. "You said you wanted to talk about something important?" I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of my own thoughts pressing down on me. "Yes," I admitted, my voice softer than usual. "There's something I need to say." I hesitated, gathering my thoughts. How was I supposed to explain something I had barely even admitted to myself? I had spent so much of my life pretending. Pretending to be naive, pretending to be weaker than I was. At first, it was a necessity, a survival tactic. There had been no room for trust, no space for attachments. The only rule that mattered was simple. Make people love you, but never love them back. That was how you survived. I had learned that lesson the hard way. But then I thought of her, the girl from my past life. The one person who had accepted me when no one else would. Emma. I could still remember the warmth of her arms around me, the quiet sadness in her voice as she held me close for the last time. "Do not live this way, please." Even now, her words echoed in my mind. A plea from a girl who no longer existed in this world. I had buried my feelings back then, warped them, crushed them, changed them, all just to keep going. But I was tired. I didn't want to live like that anymore. I wanted something real. I looked at them, Rachel, Serafina, Cecilia, Rose, the four girls who had, in one way or another, changed everything for me, who had made my world feel bigger, brighter, fuller. Each of them was watching me, waiting for whatever it was I had to say. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Not yet, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. But not yet." Cecilia's sharp red eyes narrowed slightly. Rachel tilted her head, watching me carefully. Serafina remained still, unreadable as ever. And Rose just waited, as if she already knew. "I know what I said," I continued, exhaling. "And I meant it. But before I commit to anything, I need to be sure of something first." I clenched my fists at my sides. Before I could let myself love someone, I needed to know who I was. I needed to know, with absolute certainty, that I was Arthur. Not just a lost soul who had stumbled into this world by accident. Not just a borrowed name in a borrowed life. Until then, I closed my eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again, meeting their gazes one by one. Rachel's deep blue, Serafina's ice blue, Cecilia's crimson red, Rose's warm brown. They were the first people who had made me feel alive in a very long time. The first people who had reminded me that my heart was still capable of beating. I let out a breath and smiled. "I like all of you," I admitted, tilting my head slightly, a wry smile tugging at my lips. Romantically. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't pretending. I pressed my lips together, hands resting on my knees, waiting for their response. It wasn't often that silence carried the weight of a falling guillotine. Maybe they'd reject me outright. Polygamy existed in this world. Sure, but it wasn't exactly common, especially not among people with personalities as strong as theirs. Rachel, Cecilia, Serafina, and Rose, each of them had a will of steel, an ego sharpened by talent and upbringing. It wasn't as simple as saying, "I like you all, let's figure this out." But I'd said it anyway, and now I was waiting. Rachel was the first to move. She smiled at me, the kind that softened the edges of my nerves, though there was something else in her eyes, something both knowing and expectant. "You beat me to it, huh?" she said, and my breath caught. She reached out, placing a hand over mine. "Arthur, for a long time, my heart has been yours." Her fingers curled slightly, a squeeze, as if she needed to anchor herself in the moment. "I want to be yours." A warmth I couldn't quite name spread through my chest. "And as for waiting," Rachel added, her sapphire eyes gleaming, "I don't mind waiting a bit for someone like you." I barely had a moment to process before Rose spoke up, her voice quieter but just as firm. "I agree," she said, cheeks dusted with red. I also like you more than just a friend, Arthur." Rose, the girl who had always been there, steady and kind, always offering quiet support without demanding anything in return. Hearing her say it outright, admitting something that had likely sat unspoken for a long time, made something tighten in my throat. Cecilia let out a dramatic sigh, arms crossed, her crimson eyes darting anywhere but at me. "Well," she said, voice laced with a nervous bravado that was utterly unlike her. Before I say anything, I should probably apologize for how I acted before. She inhaled sharply, then forced herself to meet my gaze. I wasn't exactly great to you in the beginning. I pushed you away, toyed with you, treated you like some plaything she swallowed. When I was too much of a coward to admit I actually liked you. Cecilia, the ever-playful, ever-unpredictable, suddenly seemed so much more human. I'm sorry, she said, softer now. I genuinely like you, Arthur. And then, finally, Serafina spoke. Me too, she said simply, with that quiet, composed certainty that only she could pull off. I like you too. I exhaled, slow and measured, though my heart was anything but. Thank you, I said, looking at each of them, taking in the weight of their words, the emotions brimming beneath them, for caring about me, for trusting me with this. I inhaled. And, I won't keep you waiting long. I promised, voice steadier than I felt. I need to be ready. For all of you. Rachel smirked, though there was no bite to it, only something warm and teasing. You better not, she said, nudging me lightly. That was all it took for the tension to shatter. The room filled with laughter, light and easy, washing away the heaviness of the moment. It didn't fix everything, didn't erase the inevitable complications that would come. But for now it was enough. For now it was perfect. The four of them excused themselves after a while, each leaving me with something. A lingering glance, a small smile, a playful shove. When the door finally closed, I fell back onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the day settle into my bones. This was the best day of my life. Chapter 183. Wow. He really confessed, Rachel muttered, staring at the three other girls gathered in her room. The air was thick with something unspoken, something electric that neither of them wanted to acknowledge too soon. Arthur had gone to sleep early, exhausted after the day's battles. Not that anyone could blame him. Fighting Lucifer in the morning and then baring his heart in the evening? It was enough to drain anyone. I wasn't expecting it, Serafina admitted, her voice steady but softer than usual. Her silver hair caught the dim glow of the room's ambient lighting, making her seem almost ethereal. It was real. I couldn't feel anything but truth in his words. Same here, Cecilia added, stretching her arms behind her head as she lounged on the couch. I was drawn to him early on, mostly because he had so many layers to unravel. But in that moment, every last one of them peeled away.
No mystery. No masks.
Just him. Her voice wavered slightly as her cheeks darkened. He really likes us. Rachel's sapphire eyes gleamed mischievously as she pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. A soft click and then, Arthur is precious to me. Cecilia's recorded voice rang out through the room. Silence. Rose blinked, then let out a quiet chuckle. Serafina tilted her head, her normally unreadable expression betraying a flicker of amusement. Cecilia, on the other hand, turned an immediate, fiery shade of red. Oh, really? She snapped, fumbling for her own phone. All right, Saintess. Let's not pretend you're any better. Another soft click. I want him to fuck me. Rachel's own voice blared back at her. The world stood still for a second. Rose, for the first time that evening, looked genuinely stunned, her mouth slightly parted. Serafina's icy composure cracked as a faint pink dusted her normally pale cheeks. Rachel, meanwhile, had gone rigid, her brain buffering like a failing AI. You? She choked out, eyes wide in mortified betrayal. Cecilia's smirk was victorious. Play with fire, Saintess, and you will get burned, she said, leaning back like a queen on her throne. You brought out the recordings first. Rachel, still recovering from the auditory assassination of her dignity, tried to rally. Why, you're just trying to distract from the fact that you keep flashing skin to get his attention, she accused, pointing an unsteady finger at Cecilia. Cecilia arched a delicate brow and glanced down at her outfit. A casual crop top. Huh? It's just a crop top, she said, feigning innocence. Then she grinned, voice laced with wicked amusement. You know, boys tend to like girls who are a bit wild. Arthur isn't like that. Rachel shot back, crossing her arms with conviction. He's still a teenage boy, Cecilia sing-songed. Rachel opened her mouth to retort, but nothing came out. Her mind betrayed her with the sudden memory of the way Arthur had looked at her, at all of them earlier. That moment of raw honesty. Cecilia let out a satisfied chuckle. Well, none of you have kissed him yet anyway. That single statement was the verbal equivalent of tossing a mana grenade into the room. The atmosphere changed. Serafina, who had been relatively quiet throughout the exchange, slowly turned her gaze towards Cecilia. The air around her suddenly felt colder. "You kissed him?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. The temperature in the room dropped. Rose, who had been spectating with amusement until now, took a slow sip from her drink as if debating whether she should stay or evacuate. Cecilia, for the first time that evening, hesitated. Rachel's eyes sharpened, Saintess mode activating. "Cecilia." Cecilia raised her hands in mock surrender. Now, let's not jump to conclusions, ladies." But Serafina's icy stare did not waver. Rachel was still locked on her like a targeting system. And Rose? Rose was just enjoying the chaos. "So," Serafina repeated, voice slow, measured. "Did you
Kish.
him?" "Yes," Cecilia declared without a shred of shame, arms folded as she leaned back, smirking. "I took the first step, all right? He's hot. I'm a girl. Suime." Rachel and Serafina blinked, staring at her as if she had just confessed to committing treason. "You?" Rachel started, visibly struggling to process the sheer audacity. "Just admitted that out loud," Serafina finished, her silver eyes narrowing slightly in what could have been mild amusement. "What? Like you two haven't noticed?" Cecilia scoffed, flipping her golden hair over her shoulder. "Come on, we all have eyes. And let's be real, he's only getting hotter by the day." Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it, looking vaguely betrayed by reality itself. Serafina, however, tilted her head slightly, a thoughtful look crossing her face before she spoke in her usual calm tone. "I was the first one he saw in a swimsuit." The room went silent. The three other girls slowly turned to face her. Serafina merely blinked at them, her expression as composed as ever. "A bikini," she clarified, as if that somehow explained everything. Cecilia raised an eyebrow. "And?" Serafina shrugged. "I was going for a swim. He happened to be there. Though," she added, her voice carrying the barest hint of amusement, "he couldn't take his eyes off me." Rachel's expression contorted somewhere between disbelief and despair. That's." Rose, beside her, was nodding sagely, as if she had seen this coming. Rachel groaned, burying her face in her hands before looking up, determination flashing in her sapphire eyes. I loved him first," she declared, though her voice faltered toward the end, sounding less like a proclamation and more like a plea for validation. Silence. Then Cecilia chuckled. "And what has that gotten you?" Rachel deflated instantly, looking away. Rose, ever the supportive friend, patted her gently on the shoulder. Cecilia, however, was already grinning again. "Anyway, if you really wanted to get ahead, there's a certain action you could take. He wouldn't be able to resist you." Rachel's head snapped up. "What action?" Cecilia's smirk widened. "I'm not telling." "Rose, tell me." Rachel turned desperately to her, grabbing her hands. Rose simply averted her gaze, a small knowing smile on her lips. "Sorry, Rachel. It would be too unfair." Rachel pouted, turning toward Serafina, who merely shook her head, unimpressed by the display. Rachel slumped in defeat. "Well," Cecilia sighed dramatically, stretching her arms behind her head, "it doesn't really matter. I'll be monopolizing him for summer break anyway." Rose, who had been quietly sipping her tea, set down her cup with a soft clink. "He's coming to Avalon, you know. I live in Avalon too." Cecilia's smirk wavered, just for a moment. Serafina, watching the exchange, let out the tiniest, most imperceptible hum of satisfaction. "My uncle helped him create his grade 6 art," Serafina said, her voice as steady as ever, though a faint note of satisfaction lingered beneath the surface. "He'll return to Mount Hua soon enough." Rachel's expression twitched. She folded her arms, tapping her fingers against her elbow as if searching for an argument. Something, anything, that the Creighton family could offer in return. But no matter how she turned it over in her head, there was nothing. Arthur already had the Laplace method for 5-circle magic, a technique that placed him on par with the finest spellcasters of her family. When he reached the integration stage, the Tower of Magic's method for 6-circle casting would serve him just as well as Creighton's techniques. Rachel, for the first time in a long while, had nothing. Cecilia grinned, positively radiant in her enjoyment of Rachel's plight. "Oh, what a rare sight. The Saintess is down in the dumps?" she cooed, her voice practically dripping with amusement. She leaned forward, a teasing glint in her eyes. Do you need a hug, Ratch? Some words of encouragement. Rachel's fingers twitched. Serafina, watching from the sidelines, sighed internally. Here we go again. Then, as if struck by divine revelation, Rachel clapped her hands together, her sapphire eyes bright with triumph. Light magic! Cecilia blinked. Yes. It's a huge part of his arsenal. I can help him with that, Rachel declared, practically glowing with smug confidence. Cecilia tilted her head, then, with deliberate slowness, let out a small chuckle. It grew into full-blown laughter, rich and taunting. Oh wow! She gasped between giggles. How incredibly helpful. Teach him to do what he's already naturally better at. Rachel's triumphant expression soured in an instant. You? She started, but Cecilia, still grinning, clasped her hands behind her back and leaned in with a smirk. What's next? Cecilia continued, thoroughly enjoying herself. Are you going to offer him a crash course in how to breathe? Maybe some private lessons on blinking efficiently? Rachel's glare sharpened, her aura flickering dangerously close to a full-blown explosion. On the sidelines, Rose observed the back and forth with mild curiosity. She turned her gaze toward Serafina, who, to Rose's mild surprise, was watching the exchange with the mild detachment of someone observing the weather. Is it always like this with them? Rose asked, raising a brow. Serafina exhaled, the smallest shake of her head betraying her weariness. Always. As Rachel and Cecilia continued their bickering, Serafina simply sat down, resting her chin on her hand. It was going to be a long night. Chapter 184. Cecilia's Sweet 16. The first year at Mythos Academy had come to an end. 9 months. Nearly an entire year in this world. The time had slipped past faster than I ever could have anticipated. When I first arrived here, reality had been a weight pressing down on me. A world brimming with prodigies, monstrous talents who outstripped me in every conceivable way. Power, influence, resources, experience, I had none of it. Not compared to them. I had to be careful. I had to be smart. I had to survive. But now, I hadn't just caught up. I had surpassed them. Lucifer, Rain, Cecilia, Rachel, Jean, Ian, Serafina, the others. Every single one of them had been ahead of me when I first arrived. Now I stood at the peak of my year. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Strength was a fleeting thing in this world. A transient moment between one struggle and the next. If I stopped pushing forward, I would be left behind. And that was unacceptable. I leaned back into my seat, staring out the window as the flight hummed steadily toward Avalon. There were too many things to do, too many loose ends to tie up before my second year began. First, I had to figure out the truth about Arthur Nightingale, the real one. Luna had no answers. That alone unsettled me more than I cared to admit. The memories of this body belonged to him, but they had been nothing more than a faint echo in the back of my mind. A shadow of a life that should have been lived but wasn't. And that meant there was a question I had yet to answer. Where was the original Arthur Nightingale? No one, not even Luna, had an answer for that. And if she didn't know, then whatever had happened to him was beyond anything I had encountered so far. I exhaled slowly, letting my thoughts settle into something tangible. I needed a plan. 3 months. That was how long the summer break would last. 3 months to sharpen myself into something even greater than I was now. 7 months until the Inter-Academy Festival. And by then, I needed to reach integration rank. It was ambitious, maybe even reckless, but I had never been one to take the safe route. I also had the Tower of Magic to train at, thanks to my newfound sponsorship under Charlotte Alaric. That in itself would be invaluable, not just for magic but for the connections I could make. Then there was Mount Hua. I owed Master Li a visit, and his training would be useful in refining my swordsmanship. Serafina, too. I needed to check on her. Rachel. I had to meet with Alastair Creighton and claim my reward. More than that, I needed to spend time with Rachel before she went off to whatever grueling training the Creighton family had prepared for her. And Arden Windward. He owed me a prize from our bet. It was time to collect. You're going to be busy, Luna mused, her voice curling into my thoughts like smoke. Yeah. The hum of the engines shifted slightly as the plane began its descent. Avalon. Home. It was a strange word to assign to this place. Even stranger to assign to the people waiting for me. But they were mine, weren't they? The first family I had ever truly had. And despite everything else, the battles, the ambitions, the responsibilities, there was a part of me that found comfort in that. When I stepped through the door of our home, a wave of warmth washed over me. It wasn't the kind of warmth that came from temperature, but the kind that seeped into your bones. A quiet comfort you never quite realized you missed until you had it again. The familiar scent of home-cooked food, spices, fresh bread, and something sweet baking in the oven filled the air. My mother always had a knack for making the house feel welcoming, and after months at Mythos Academy, the contrast was almost overwhelming. Before I could take another step, a blur of movement slammed into me. Arthur, my little sister Arya, latched onto me like a barnacle, squeezing me with all the strength her small arms could muster. "You're finally back. Did you bring me anything?" I chuckled, ruffling her hair. "You don't even say hi first?" She pulled back, pouting, her azure eyes, our mother's, narrowing in accusation. "You were gone forever. That deserves a present." I smirked and pulled out a small, enchanted snow globe from my spatial ring. Inside, tiny figures moved in a never-ending dance, a miniature illusion spell keeping it animated. "Here, straight from Mount Hua." Arya's face lit up, and she snatched it eagerly, shaking it despite my warning glance. "This is so cool." Our mother stepped into the living room, wiping her hands on her apron, her warm eyes settling on me with the kind of look only a mother could give, a mix of exasperation and affection. "You've grown again." I smiled sheepishly. "It happens." She sighed, then walked up to pull me into a hug, far gentler than Arya's, but just as firm. "I saw your matches." She leaned back slightly, her gaze scanning me. "You didn't get hurt, did you?" "Not in any way that mattered." My father walked in then, his expression more reserved, but there was a quiet pride in his eyes. He wasn't the kind of man who gushed over achievements, but I knew him well enough to recognize when he was impressed. "You did well," he said simply. "Thanks, Dad." He nodded, then gestured toward the couch. "Sit. You can tell us everything over dinner." It didn't take long before we were all gathered at the dining table, the usual home-cooked feast laid out in front of us. Arya was already halfway through her plate, bouncing in her seat as I recounted everything that had happened over the past few months. "Well," my mother said after I finished the short version, "you certainly know how to keep busy." I gave a tired chuckle. "You could say that." She smiled knowingly, then exchanged a glance with my father before setting down her fork. "There's something else." I raised a brow. "Something else?" She nodded. "We received an invitation. For all of us." I frowned. That was odd. My family wasn't part of any noble house. Invitations, especially formal ones, weren't something we normally received. "To what?" I asked. "To Cecilia Slatemark's Sweet 16. I blinked, then blinked again. "What?" I leaned back, rubbing my temple. "That is unexpected." My mother smirked. "Is it really?" I hesitated. "No," I admitted. "Not really." She laughed. "At least you're aware." My father, ever the practical one, crossed his arms. "We're not nobles. Why would we be invited to something like this?" Arya giggled. "Because Arthur's her favorite." I shot her a look, but she just stuck her tongue out at me. Mother nodded in agreement, barely containing her amusement. "It's clearly because of you, dear. The princess must be quite fond of you." I sighed. "Cecilia's persistent." "She's interested," my mother corrected, a knowing smile playing at her lips. I didn't deny it. I was more than aware of Cecilia's feelings. She was never subtle about them. Not even a little. "Well," my father said after a moment, "if we're going, we'll need to prepare." "Oh!" Arya nearly bounced out of her chair. "I need a dress." I groaned, already picturing the extravagant event ahead. This was going to be something. Chapter 185. Considering it was Cecilia's 16th birthday, the entire world seemed determined to put on a show. The Slatemark Empire had spared no expense, the palace practically glowing with gold and crimson banners fluttering against the night sky. The security was tight, guards stationed at every entrance, their sleek exosuits glinting under the artificial lighting, mana-powered drones hovering just out of sight, scanning the incoming guests. A celebration, yes, but not without its precautions. The Slatemarks weren't the only ones under scrutiny. Every noble house worth its name had sent a delegation. The Creightons, the Windwards, the Viserians, the Ashbluffs, all of them had made an appearance. Even the Namgung family from the eastern continent had arrived, their presence an unmistakable declaration of interest. And me? I was here as both a participant and an observer. Because soon enough, it wouldn't just be Cecilia's birthday being celebrated, it would be the Crown Prince's 18th. Valerian Slatemark, a character who, despite his royal title, was little more than a footnote in the grand scheme of history. Not particularly talented, not particularly brilliant, and most crucially, not a student of Mythos Academy. His failure to gain admission had been a quiet scandal, one his family had rushed to smother, claiming he had never intended to apply in the first place. Instead, he attended Slatemark Academy, where he languished in mediocrity, overshadowed by younger talents, by Cecilia, by the rising stars of his generation, by everyone. And that made him dangerous. The coup that would result from his desperate actions would fracture the empire, leaving wounds so deep they would never fully heal. His paranoia would turn even those who loved him against him. His failure would cost not just his throne, but his world. Because while the Slatemark Empire waged war against itself, the demons would be watching. Waiting. They had plans for Earth. Plans that hinged on the moon base, humanity's last line of defense against an invasion. The fortress floating above them, buried deep in lunar rock, housed an artifact the demons had been searching for across countless worlds. And when Valerian's coup shattered the Empire's unity, the base would fall. The demons would claim their prize. And then the war would truly begin. I wasn't about to let that happen. And the first step? Navigating this damn banquet. It wasn't just a party. It was a battlefield. One where words were sharper than swords, alliances were forged over wine, and every smile hit a dagger. More than just the established noble houses, the prodigies of Slatemark Academy would be here as well. Leora Arundel, the future Ice Empress, a mage who would one day turn entire battlefields into frozen wastelands. Tobias Grimfeld, the Titan of Slatemark, a dark mage with a reputation for overwhelming brute force. Naomi Draven, the Mist Enchantress, unparalleled in illusion magic. And Alara Astoria, the Veil of Grace, her healing magic capable of turning the tide of wars. Each of them had the potential to change the future. And then there was him, Jack Blazespout. Even now, just thinking about him sent a chill down my spine. The man who, in another timeline, had annihilated the Slatemark Academy, then the Viserian family, then anyone who dared to stand in his path. Unlike the others, his fate was already written in blood. A wielder of both Nirvana flames and abyssal flames, his soul entwined with a legendary-grade artifact that had devoured the will of the heavenly demon himself. A monster in human skin. A being so powerful that even the radiant rank warriors of the world hesitated to confront him in the future. The one called the Third Calamity Hellflame Emperor in the novel. Tonight, he would just be another noble son, blending into the crowd, smiling, speaking in polite tones. But I knew better. This banquet wasn't just a celebration. It was an opportunity to observe, to strategize, to ensure that when the time came I would be ready. With that thought, I turned to the mirror, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored black suit, the silver embroidery catching the light. The nightingale crest, a stylized silver bird in flight, was stitched subtly into my collar. It was formal enough for a noble gathering, practical enough to move in should things go sideways. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. My father stepped in first, his gaze sweeping over me with the careful assessment of a man who had spent decades in high society. He nodded approvingly. "You look ready." "Thanks," I said, offering a small smile. Behind him, my mother entered, dressed in a shimmering midnight blue gown, her elegance effortless as always. Arya, my sister, wore a similar dress, her eyes filled with excitement at the grandeur of it all. "You look handsome, Arthur," my mother said warmly, adjusting my collar just slightly. "Remember, this is a celebration. Try to enjoy yourself." I nodded. "I will, Mom." The words were easy enough to say, but I knew the truth. This wasn't just a celebration. This was the beginning of the next chapter. As we stepped outside, the sleek black car bearing the Minerva insignia awaited us, its surface reflecting the towering skyline of the imperial city. The journey to the palace was smooth, the streets meticulously maintained, the city humming with the presence of high-ranking officials, dignitaries, and nobles. By the time we arrived, the palace was already bathed in golden light, the crimson banners of the Slatemark Empire rippling in the evening breeze. Security was tight, Guards in ceremonial clothes stood at the entrance, their helmets sleek, their weapons charged but holstered. High above, drones flitted across the sky, scanning each incoming guest. The car came to a slow stop, and a guard stepped forward, opening the door. My father stepped out first, then my mother, then Arya. Finally, I followed, adjusting my suit as my gaze swept across the sea of noble guests already arriving. The air buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the faint clinking of glasses. The scent of fine wines, rare perfumes, and the polished stone of the palace grounds filled the air. And then, as the doors of the grand hall loomed before me, I took a breath. This was the beginning of Cecilia's birthday banquet. The Slatemark Imperial Palace wasn't just a building. It was a statement, a declaration of power, wealth, and history woven seamlessly with cutting-edge technology. Unlike the castles of old, where grandeur was often synonymous with impractical excess, this palace was the perfect blend of timeless elegance and modern efficiency. Every inch of the structure was a deliberate masterpiece, a marriage of traditional craftsmanship and futuristic innovation. Discreet security measures were woven into the very fabric of the walls. Holographic mana barriers, hidden surveillance drones that floated silently in the air, and defensive wards disguised as decorative engravings. Even the lighting, soft and ambient, adjusted in real time to complement the setting, subtly shifting to highlight important areas without overwhelming the palace's regal atmosphere. As I walked down the expansive hallway, the polished marble floors reflected the glow of the chandeliers overhead. The walls were lined with massive tapestries, their woven threads infused with a faint luminescence, depicting battles that shaped the Slatemark Empire's rise. One in particular caught my eye. It was impossible to ignore. The massive tapestry dominated the hallway, stretching nearly from floor to ceiling. At its center stood a lone man, his presence towering over the battlefield he commanded. He was clad in armor that shimmered with an ethereal glow, his golden blonde hair cascading past his shoulders like a lion's mane. Around him, chaos raged, blades clashed, storms roared, fire and lightning split the heavens, but none of it touched him. Julius Slatemark, the first Radiant rank, the founder of the Slatemark Empire, the man who shaped history not through conquest alone, but through sheer, undeniable presence. His gift, Empyrean order, made it so that everything bent to his will. He wasn't merely a warrior, he was a force of nature wrapped in the skin of a man. The scene captured him at his peak, standing at the heart of a battlefield, unshaken as elemental forces swirled around him. Firestorms crashed against invisible barriers, lightning arced and froze midair, blades shattered before even reaching his skin. He commanded not just people but the very world itself. I stopped, staring at the tapestry longer than I intended. Something about it stirred something in me. A sense of inevitability, like I was standing at the precipice of a revelation I wasn't quite ready to grasp. Then I felt it. A warmth, subtle yet unmistakable, pulsing from my arm. Beneath the fabric of my sleeve, the sigils of loosened harmony flickered to life, as if responding to something unseen. And then, a voice, soft, wistful, echoing in my mind like a memory surfacing after centuries of silence. Julius, it's been so long since I last saw him.
Luna.
My breath caught for a moment. She knew him. Of course she did. Julius Slatemark had wielded loosened harmony before me. He had been the one to carry Luna's will before she ended up in my hands. 1,000 questions crashed into my mind, but only one managed to take form. If he had both Empyrean order and loosened harmony, wouldn't that have made him unstoppable? Julius wasn't the only one in history to possess two gifts. I knew of two others, Lucifer Windward, the supposed child of prophecy, and Jack Blazespout, the future Hellflame Emperor and Third Calamity. But technically, Julius' second ability wasn't a gift in the traditional sense. Loosened harmony wasn't something he was born with, it was a beast's will. And yet, functionally, it acted just like a gift. Which led me to a question the novel had never answered. Why could only certain people wield two gifts while the rest of humanity was stuck with one? Lucifer hadn't obtained Luna's will in the original storyline, likely because it would have been his third gift. And if that was impossible, then logic dictated that two was the absolute limit. But why? If obtaining multiple beast wills was even remotely possible, then surely at least one of the Radiant rankers would have figured it out by now. Yet none had. The answer wasn't in the books, nor was it in any known records. Julius, Lucifer, Jack, were they simply anomalies? Outliers whose very existence defied the rules? I exhaled slowly, tearing my gaze away from the tapestry. The realization sat heavy in my chest. There were still too many things I didn't understand. Chapter 186. With a breath that did little to steady my nerves, I followed my parents and sister through the towering double doors of the banquet hall. Instantly, we were swallowed by a tide of warmth, laughter, and the soft hum of stringed instruments weaving through the air. The sheer opulence of the room threatened to overwhelm the senses. Golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over polished marble floors, and the scent of aged wine and expensive perfume mingled with the crisp coolness of manna-infused air. The nobility of the Slate-Mark Empire moved like a well-rehearsed symphony, dressed in garments spun from wealth itself. Gowns shimmered as though woven from stardust, and suits were tailored with an elegance that spoke of old money and older ambition. Conversations flowed like fine liquor, pleasant and polite on the surface but undoubtedly laced with 1,000 undercurrents of scheming and silent rivalries. My father leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Arthur, we will greet the princess first. Formalities must be observed." I inclined my head in understanding, though my focus was already being pulled in several directions. The sheer weight of the room pressed against me, a suffocating wave of manna that hummed through the air like a tangible force. It wasn't just the presence of nobles and socialites. No, this gathering held something far more formidable. I let my senses stretch, picking up on the impossible depths of mana signatures clustered throughout the hall. Immortal rancors, more than I've ever sensed in one place. They stood in quiet conversations, their power concealed beneath layers of restraint. But to those who could feel it, their presence was like standing in the eye of a storm. Dozens of ascendant rancors filled the spaces between, their auras like crackling embers compared to the infernos of the immortals. And scattered throughout the hall, imperial knights stationed for security remained still as statues, living weapons, waiting for the slightest shift in danger. The air thickened as a sudden hush swept across the room. The chatter stilled, laughter choked into silence, and all attention snapped toward the entrance as a deep, commanding voice rang out, announcing the arrival of the imperial family of the Slate-Mark Empire. Like clockwork, the nobility turned in unison, their practiced smiles giving way to polite reverence. The grand doors at the far end of the hall opened, revealing the figures who ruled over the mightiest empire on the central continent. Emperor Quinn Slate-Mark strode forward first, his mere presence enough to command absolute attention. He was a man who carried the weight of an empire on his shoulders and did so without flinching. His robes, embroidered with ancient sigils of authority, caught the light as he moved, and his sharp gaze swept across the room like a blade, measuring the worth of every soul present. At his side, Empress Adeline exuded a quiet grace, her expression unreadable but her gaze knowing. She carried herself like someone who saw everything, a woman who understood the subtle language of power better than anyone in the room. Crown Prince Valerian followed, his face a careful mask of composure. He was the image of a perfect heir, poised, confident, and yet not at ease. There was a stiffness in his shoulders, a flicker of unease behind his otherwise impeccable demeanor. Not a fan of these gatherings, then, I noted. And then there was her. Cecilia Slate-Mark walked with an ease that suggested she had been born for moments like this, because of course she had. The princess of the empire, the prodigy, the one whose very name carried weight far beyond these halls. Her crimson gown clung to her with effortless elegance, the fabric moving like liquid fire with every step. Unlike her brother, she carried no visible discomfort, though I caught the faintest flicker of amusement in her gaze as her eyes met mine for the briefest of moments. She gave the smallest nod of acknowledgement, so subtle that most wouldn't have even noticed. But I did. The imperial family made their way to the raised platform at the far end of the hall, their thrones a declaration of power more than mere seating. The moment they settled, the tension in the air coiled even tighter, like a string wound to the edge of snapping. Then the herald spoke again, the first to present their greetings, representatives of the great superpowers of the world. A ripple of movement spread through the grand hall, a slow but undeniable shift in the air as the true powers of the world stepped forward. It was not just a formal procession, it was a quiet declaration, a careful game of measured steps and veiled intentions. The first to move were the Windwards. Lucifer Windward walked with the unshakable composure of someone who had long accepted that the world was his to conquer. His stride was deliberate, his bow to the emperor and empress measured to the precise degree expected of a prince of the north. His uncle, speaking for the family, delivered their congratulations with the ease of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. There was no flourish, no excess, just a smooth and practiced performance of power wrapped in etiquette. The Creightons followed next, led by Rachel Creighton, her every movement a study in controlled grace. Her polite smile was unwavering, polished to perfection, revealing nothing more than what she intended. Beside her, her older sister, Kathleen Creighton, spoke for their family. The warmth in her words felt genuine, but this was the Creighton family, masters of diplomacy, architects of the magic that ruled the world. Even sincerity, when it came from them, was a carefully honed weapon. Then came the Ashbluffs. Gene Ashbluff walked with the quiet intensity that never quite left him, his sharp gaze flickering toward the imperial family before he offered his bow. His mother spoke, her voice clear and firm, a subtle assertion that though the Ashbluffs ruled from the shadows, they were not to be overlooked. The Viserians stepped forward, their presence like a slow-burning fire. Ian Viserion bowed, his golden red hair catching the light, his expression unreadable. Dragons did not bow easily, but the Viserians knew when to honor tradition. His uncle's voice carried the deep, steady cadence of his ancestors, words respectful yet tinged with the unmistakable pride of a family that had never known submission. From the east, the Mount Hua sect entered the fold. Seraphina Zenith, her silver hair a gleaming contrast to the dark robes of her sect, moved with the effortless fluidity of a swordswoman raised in discipline. She bowed with impeccable grace, while beside her, Li Zenith, the second strongest in the sect, spoke for them. His words were few, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. Mount Hua was not a political player in the same way as the others, yet their presence alone was enough to demand respect. The Kagu family followed, their footsteps silent but deliberate. Rinkagu bowed with the cool detachment that had become his signature, his expression betraying no emotion. His father, however, was all eloquence, his voice a smooth and calculated force as he congratulated the princess. The Kagu family had little need for dramatics. Ren's mere presence was enough. The violet eyes of the boy who saw everything lingered on Cecilia for a fraction too long before he straightened once more. With the dominant superpowers having played their part, the next to approach was Archduke Astoria and his daughter Elara Astoria. The Archduke carried himself with the effortless dignity of old nobility, his voice measured, his words perfectly placed. Elara, ever composed, bowed with the sincerity of someone who had no interest in playing politics but understood the necessity of the act. Duke Blazespout followed, his presence carrying a quiet storm beneath its surface. His son, Jack Blazespout, mirrored his father's intensity, though his mask of politeness was carefully worn. Jack bowed smoothly, his sharp gaze lingering longer than necessary, as though memorizing every detail of the imperial family's expressions. The Duke's words were steady, his tone the kind that suggested he saw this as a mere formality before the real negotiations began. Then came Marquis Arundel with his daughter, Leora Arundel. Leora's presence was one of effortless elegance, her expression neutral but alert. She bowed with the ease of someone well-versed in courtly customs, her father's voice a quiet but firm addition to the chorus of greetings. Marquis Grimfeld and his son, Tobias Grimfeld, followed shortly after. Tobias, broad-shouldered and exuding confidence, bowed deeply, his father delivering a perfectly diplomatic speech. Their presence was solid but unremarkable, blending into the sea of noble families that followed. As the line of esteemed figures continued, more names entered the fold: Kali Luna and the Luna family, Naomi Draven with Count Draven. Naomi's sharp eyes flickered with curiosity as she observed the proceedings before bowing, her father speaking with careful reverence. The hall filled with the practiced pleasantries of nobility, words of congratulations blending into one another, their underlying currents known only to those well-versed in courtly games. And then, at long last, it was our turn. Chapter 187. "Come, Arthur," my father said, his voice carrying a note of quiet bewilderment as he gestured toward the raised platform. "Apparently, we're making our introductions." That was unusual. I could see the slight furrow in his brow, the way his fingers twitched at his side, a rare tell of surprise. House Nightingale, for all its history, was not even a noble house. In the grand hierarchy of the empire, we were respectable but unremarkable, our name holding weight but not enough to justify this kind of attention. Typically, only counts and above were expected, allowed even to formally greet the imperial family during events like this. Yet, here we were, summoned forward in front of a room full of people who very much noticed the irregularity. I followed him, my mother gliding beside us, her expression perfectly composed, though I could see the calculation in her eyes. The room quieted slightly as we moved. Conversations didn't stop entirely, but they softened, like everyone had just collectively leaned in a little closer to listen without being obvious about it. We reached the base of the platform where Emperor Quinn Slatemark and Empress Adeline sat with the practiced ease of rulers who knew their presence alone commanded the room. Beside them, dressed in deep red silk embroidered with arcane silver patterns, sat Cecilia Slatemark, the reason for the evening's celebrations. My parents bowed deeply, and I followed suit, inclining my head just enough to convey respect without looking servile. "Your Imperial Majesties," my father said, his voice steady but edged with a certain crispness that only I would notice. "It is an honor for the Nightingale family to be present on this joyous occasion. We extend our sincerest congratulations to Princess Cecilia." A perfectly polite statement, neutral, offering respect but asking for nothing in return. The Emperor nodded, his gaze sharp as he regarded my father. "We are pleased to have you here, Lord Nightingale. Your family's service to the Empire has been noted and appreciated." That was another surprise. Appreciated? Not valued. Not acknowledged. Words that would have kept the pleasantries cold and distant. This was a step above that. The Emperor didn't waste words. My mother stepped forward smoothly, presenting a small, exquisitely wrapped gift. "A humble token for the Princess, Your Majesty," she said, her voice effortlessly graceful. "May this day be filled with joy." Empress Adeline accepted the gift with a gracious smile, her sharp eyes taking in my mother with the kind of silent appraisal that rulers mastered. "Thank you, Lady Nightingale," she said, her voice warm but unreadable. And then Cecilia spoke. "Arthur," she said, and there it was, the shift in the room, subtle but immediate. The way the surrounding nobles paid closer attention, the way my father, despite his years of political experience, went very still for a fraction of a second. "It's good to see you." There was familiarity in her tone. A softness, even. I met her gaze and bowed once more. "Thank you, Your Highness. It is an honor to be here for your special day." She studied me for a lingering moment, the faintest smile playing at her lips, like she knew exactly what she was doing by acknowledging me so openly. "I hope you enjoy the festivities tonight. Please, feel free to partake in the celebration." I nodded, stepping back in measured deference as my parents concluded their greetings. The moment we turned away, I felt the eyes on us, the ripple of curiosity spreading through the room like a stone dropped in still water. Conversations resumed, but they had taken a new shape, shifting to the unexpected scene they had just witnessed. After all, for all the distinguished guests in attendance, it wasn't a high-ranking duke or a visiting dignitary that Princess Cecilia had personally welcomed with warmth. It was me. My mother's smile was warm as she adjusted the hem of my jacket, her hands lingering just a moment too long, as if she wasn't quite ready to let me go. "Arthur, Arya, have fun," she said, stepping back with a nod of approval. My father, ever the quieter of the two, merely gave a curt nod, though I caught the way his gaze lingered, a silent reminder to behave. Arya, standing beside me in a frilly dress that she had clearly picked out for maximum twirlability, tugged at my sleeve with barely contained excitement. "Arthur, can we meet your celebrity friends again?" I sighed, ruffling her hair just enough to earn a glare. "Sure, if you aren't annoying." "I'm never annoying," she declared, hands on her hips, radiating the same confidence that somehow ran in the family. Before I could deliver a much-needed reality check, a flicker of gold caught my eye. A blur, moving fast, a presence I would recognize anywhere. Rachel. She was in front of me before I could even straighten up, her deep sapphire eyes locking onto mine, the faintest flush on her cheeks. "Finally found you." Her voice was soft, just for me, carrying the warmth of someone who had waited too long. Her lips curled into a smile, and the weight of her absence suddenly settled over me. "I missed you, Arthur." My heart stuttered. Rachel turned to Arya, greeting her with the same easy warmth, and Arya, being Arya, practically preened at the attention. And then another presence. Serafina, appearing as quietly as the falling snow, her silver hair cascading down her shoulders like woven moonlight. "Hey, Sarah." I greeted her with a smile. She simply looked at me, her expression as composed as ever, but I caught the subtle way the corners of her lips lifted. "Oh my God!" Arya gasped, clutching my sleeve. You know Princess Serafina Zenith. Serafina regarded her with polite interest. Nice to meet you. Arya, meanwhile, was vibrating with barely concealed excitement. The contrast was almost comical. Then, out of nowhere, another voice. Hey Arthur. Been a few days, Rose said, materializing as if she had been there the entire time. I exhaled slowly. Rose. And just like that, it began. Arthur, my sister wanted to meet you, Rachel announced. Arthur, my uncle wanted to meet you again, Serafina added immediately after. Arthur, my father wanted to meet you, Rose followed, as if we were playing some twisted game of social tug-of-war. The three of them paused, realizing they had all spoken at once. A quiet, almost imperceptible tension settled between them. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Arya covering her mouth, eyes gleaming with the sort of amusement only a younger sibling could have when witnessing her older brother's suffering. I sighed, loudly, but before I could even attempt to maneuver my way out of the inevitable diplomatic minefield, the music shifted. A gentle melody, the kind that signaled the beginning of the evening's formalities, faded into something grander, something structured. The first dance of the night. The massive hall fell silent. The imperial family sat at the highest tier, their presence commanding attention without a word. At their center, Emperor Quinn stood, raising a single hand for silence. The murmurs of the gathered elites, dignitaries, and prodigies from across the world hushed instantly. Then, with a nod, the emperor's gaze fell on his daughter. Cecilia Slatemark stood, her movements fluid, effortless, like someone who had been born to command a room. There was an unspoken expectation hanging in the air, that she, as the princess, would lead the first dance. It was an honor, a tradition steeped in significance. Whispers rippled through the crowd as she descended the steps, the rhythmic click of her heels echoing in the vast space. Who would she choose? Every eligible noble son, every heir worth their title, straightened slightly, anticipation written on their faces. To be chosen by the princess for the first dance was more than just a fleeting moment of prestige, it was a statement. Then, in one elegant movement, Cecilia turned toward me. Her scarlet eyes locked onto mine, filled with mischief, amusement, and just a hint of challenge. Arthur Nightingale, she called, her voice clear, unwavering, and loud enough for every single soul in the hall to hear. Collective breath held. Would you honor me with the first dance? I blinked. The silence stretched unbearably long. Then, from somewhere behind me, Arya's barely restrained laughter broke through the tension. Chapter 188. Are you not surprised? Cecilia asked as we moved across the floor, the grand hall's lights casting a soft glow over us. She had chosen me as I knew she would. It was obvious, really. Cecilia studied me, her crimson eyes gleaming with mischief. Your acting is really good, you know, she mused. If I wasn't as good at reading people as I am, I'd never be able to tell what's really going on in that head of yours. I twirled her, the hem of her gown sweeping the polished floor like a crimson wave. Her smile never faltered. When I first arrived in this world, I had been careful with Cecilia. Not because she was an enemy, no, she was always meant to be a major character on the side of good, but because of how she operated. Cecilia Slatemark crushed people. Not out of malice, but because it was fun for her. She enjoyed the game, the power, the way people struggled under her influence. She was a princess, after all. That meant she had the leverage to get whatever she wanted, and most people never dared to defy her. And if they did, she crushed them harder. Back then, I couldn't afford to stand against her outright. Intelligence and knowledge meant nothing in the face of sheer, overwhelming power. Knowing the future only got you so far when someone like Cecilia could dictate yours with a single command. So I played along. I maneuvered carefully, dodging her traps, using Rachel whenever possible to keep myself from being cornered. I played into her whims just enough to stay afloat, but never enough to drown. But now I didn't need to do that. I led her into a sweeping dip, her blonde hair cascading down, her teasing smirk never wavering. I want your eyes only on me, Arthur, she whispered, the weight of her words pressing into the space between us. Not just for tonight, but always. Look at me, only me. She pulled herself closer, her breath warm against my neck. Forget the rest of the world, she murmured, her voice barely louder than the whisper of music weaving through the air. Just this once. And for a moment I did. The weight of expectation, of battle, of everything beyond this dimly lit ballroom. None of it mattered. Not when Cecilia stood so close, the scent of something soft and elusive lingering in the space between us. Not when her hand rested lightly against mine, her fingers cool, yet firm, as if holding onto something fragile. I didn't resist. There was no need to, because in the end, Cecilia had never tried to hurt me. Thus whatever this was okay. Her eyes gleamed with something unreadable, something almost hesitant, yet she smiled. Not the teasing smirk she always wore when she toyed with others, nor the sharp glint of mischief she so often directed at me. This smile was quieter, something softer beneath the layers of arrogance and power. "Arthur," she said, voice steady despite the way her grip tightened. "I'm glad you're coming to the Tower of Magic." A pause. "I want to spend time with you." It was strange how easily she could unsettle me. Not with her usual antics, but with sincerity. I exhaled, letting my hand settle properly against hers. "I thought you were the one always running off and doing your own thing." "That's different." She tilted her head, a lock of golden hair slipping over her shoulder as we moved together in a slow turn. "That's for fun. This is..." She hesitated. "This is something I actually want." The music swelled around us, each note measured and deliberate, echoing the unspoken tension in the space between us. We moved in sync, her leading sometimes, me leading others, but neither ever truly taking control. It was like a negotiation in motion, each step testing the limits of the other, seeing how much the other would yield. For all her wit and charm, Cecilia was a warrior in spirit, a schemer, a tactician. She didn't submit, not truly. And yet, she trusted me enough to match my pace. I let my grip on her waist tighten just slightly, guiding her through a turn. Her breath hitched almost imperceptibly before she caught herself, her smirk returning in full force. "I see you've been practicing," she mused, twirling back into my arms with a grace that made it look effortless. "Trying to impress someone?" "Just keeping up with you," I replied evenly. "You flatter me, Arthur," she purred, but there was an edge of real amusement in her tone. The song reached its final measures, the last few notes lingering as I slowed our movements. Her fingers curled slightly against my palm, lingering in the moment as the last echoes of the music faded into silence. The world settled around us again, heavier than before. Cecilia sighed, her gaze flickering downward for the briefest moment before she met my eyes again. "I meant what I said," she murmured, her voice losing its teasing lilt. "I'll never hurt you, Arthur." I blinked. "I know that." "No," she said firmly. "Not just that. I won't let anyone else hurt you either." Something flickered across her expression, something dangerous and unwavering. "If they try," she said, voice dropping to something softer, darker, "I'll crush them." I stared at her for a long moment, unsure whether to take her words as a joke or a declaration. But when I looked into her eyes, I realized she wasn't joking. Cecilia twirled out of my grasp, her scarlet dress catching the light in a shimmer of silk and magic. The moment she released my hands, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Dancing with Cecilia was like balancing on the edge of a blade. Thrilling, dangerous, and requiring absolute focus. I watched as she sauntered off with a smirk, eyes gleaming with something between amusement and satisfaction. It was hard to tell if she'd been enjoying herself or simply enjoying my discomfort. Maybe both. "She's terrifying," I thought, rolling my shoulders to shake off the tension. "But it's nice to have her at my side." The music shifted, flowing into a softer melody, and before I could even take another breath, a warm, delicate hand slid into mine. "Rachel." She looked radiant under the festival lights, her golden hair woven into an intricate braid, sapphire eyes shimmering with something I couldn't quite name. Unlike Cecilia, who danced as if she were leading a battle campaign, Rachel moved with effortless grace, a natural rhythm that made me feel like I belonged in the moment rather than fighting to keep up. "You seem relieved," she teased, her lips curling into a playful smile. "Dancing with Cecilia is like trying to navigate a battlefield," I admitted, letting her guide me through the first steps. Rachel laughed, the sound light and melodic. "She is a battlefield, you mean?" I huffed a quiet chuckle, letting her spin under my arm before catching her waist again. "You're a much better partner." "Oh," she raised a brow. "You mean I don't make you feel like you're about to die?" "That too." She laughed again, but this time there was something softer beneath it, something warm. We moved together, the dance easy, effortless, like breathing. I caught the way her gaze flickered across my face, like she wanted to say something but thought better of it. Instead, she just held on a little tighter as the music slowed, the last few steps dragging out longer than necessary. "Thank you for this," she whispered. And then, just like that, the song ended, and she stepped away. I barely had time to process the shift before another hand reached for mine, smaller, cooler, like a whisper of frost against my skin. "Serafina." She looked up at me, expression unreadable as always, but there was a quiet softness to her silver eyes, something calmer than the usual stoicism she carried. Her dress was a shade of blue so pale it was almost white, flowing like mist with every movement. "You don't like crowds," I murmured as I took her hand. "No," she admitted, allowing me to lead. "But I don't dislike this." That was as close to a compliment as I'd ever get from Serafina. She moved with precision, each step calculated and controlled, as if she were performing a sword form rather than a dance. There was an elegance to it, an underlying strength hidden in the fluidity of her movements. "You're tense?" I noted, guiding her through a slow turn. She blinked, looking almost startled before lowering her gaze. "I don't do this often. Dancing, being close to people." I didn't press her on it. Instead, I just adjusted our pace, making it easier for her to follow, letting her settle into the rhythm at her own pace. After a few moments, she exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing. And for the first time that night, she moved with me instead of merely beside me. The song ended, and she hesitated for just a second before stepping away. "Thank you," she murmured. I gave her a small nod, watching as she retreated into the crowd. One left. I turned just in time for Rose to step forward, her usual gentle smile in place. Unlike the others, she didn't wait for me to extend a hand. She simply took it, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You look exhausted," she said, eyes twinkling with amusement. "Cecilia happened," I sighed. "That explains it." Rose's dance was different from all the others. She didn't move with the precision of Serafina or the confidence of Rachel. She simply flowed, like a quiet river, moving to the music in a way that felt entirely effortless. "You're good at this," I noted. I grew up in a noble house, remember?" She smiled, though there was something distant in her eyes. "Lots of banquets, lots of dancing. It's expected." The way she said it, like it was more obligation than enjoyment, made me frown slightly. "Do you like it?" She blinked, surprised by the question, then let out a soft chuckle. "With the right person, maybe." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything at all. We just moved together, the dance slow and steady, a quiet rhythm that didn't demand anything beyond the moment itself. And then the music stopped. Rose stepped back, looking at me for just a second longer than necessary before letting go. "Thanks for the dance, Arthur." And then, like the others, she was gone. I exhaled. The festival continued around me, the energy of the crowd buzzing with celebration, but for a moment, I just stood there, feeling the warmth of the past dances lingering like echoes. This world, this life, it wasn't what I had expected. But maybe, just maybe, it was better. Right, Emma? Chapter 189. After finishing my dances with Serafina, Rachel, and Rose, I finally had a moment to breathe. That moment, however, didn't last long, because my attention was quickly drawn to a group of 5 students standing together, radiating an air of confidence that suggested they were quite used to people staring. They were the pride of Slatemark Academy, the second best academy in the world, second only to Mythos Academy, which, as a proud student, I naturally believed was the superior one. Rank 1, Jack Blazespout. Rank 2, Leora Arundel. Rank 3, Tobias Grimfeld. Rank 4, Naomi Draven. Rank 5, Ilera Astoria. These weren't just any students. Each one of them had a gift, an ability that set them apart from the average elite, making them comparable in strength to my own Class 1A at Mythos Academy. And standing at the top of them all was Jack Blazespout. Jack wasn't just a prodigy. He was the heir to Duke Blazespout, one of the world's most powerful immortal rankers. That alone was enough to command respect. But there was something more, something that very few people knew. Jack Blazespout wasn't just some noble-born genius. His story was one woven into the annals of fate itself, tied to an ancient nightmare, a shadow of Murim's past that had clawed its way into the present. Nearly 2 centuries ago, there had been a figure known only as the Heavenly Demon, an apostle of the demon overlord, a man who had risen to the pinnacle of radiant rank and founded the heavenly demon sect. His reign had been short but apocalyptic. Murim had burned under his rule, and the war that followed had claimed countless lives. Among the fallen was the great Liam Kagu, one of humanity's most celebrated warriors. In his final moments, with his physical form failing and his enemies closing in, the heavenly demon had attempted to cheat death itself. He had condensed his entire existence, his soul, his power, his very essence, into a single object, a legendary-grade artifact known as the Orb of Avarice. It was a perfect trap, a flawless snare designed to consume the soul of any who dared to claim it, devouring their being to fuel its own rebirth. It was a brilliant plan, and like many brilliant plans, it failed spectacularly. The problem? The orb was too powerful, too selective. It refused to bond with just anyone. For years, it sat in the treasury of a minor sect in Murim, its power untapped, waiting for someone worthy. That moment might never have come had it not been for a completely unrelated dispute, one of the many petty conflicts that regularly flared up between Murim's sects and the noble families of the West. The Blaespout family had been involved in one such conflict. They had crushed their enemies, as was their custom, and in the process they had seized the spoils of war. Among those spoils was the Orb of Avarice. Duke Blaespout had taken one look at the shimmering purple-red sphere and felt the weight of its power pressing against his ambitions. He was already one of the strongest immortal rankers in existence, but it wasn't enough. He wanted more. He wanted the Slate Mark throne. He wanted to ascend beyond immortal rank and break through to radiant rank, a feat that only a handful of people had ever achieved. So he took the orb home, and, to his astonishment, it bonded, not with him, not with any of his seasoned warriors or mages, but with his 2-year-old son, a child, toddler. No one had ever bonded with a legendary-grade artifact at such an age. It was unprecedented, unnatural, but somehow, impossibly, the Orb of Avarice had chosen Jack Blaespout. And that was when things took an even stranger turn. The heavenly demon's grand scheme had been designed to resurrect himself through the artifact. Any normal bearer would have had their soul utterly devoured, their body becoming nothing more than a puppet for the ancient demon's will. But Jack didn't break. Instead of consuming him, the orb bonded with him. Not as a parasite, not as a master overriding its host, but as something akin to a tamed beast. Could whisper to him, tempt him, but it could not control him. The heavenly demon, despite all his meticulous planning, had been thwarted by a toddler. And that, ironically, was how humanity's greatest disaster was born. Because while the heavenly demon had once burned a continent and left scars on history, Jack Blaespout would go on to do something far worse. One day he would become the third calamity, the Hellflame Emperor, a name that would cast an even darker shadow than the one who came before him. Jack will set the South ablaze with his flames once he reaches radiant rank. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a certainty like gravity or the inevitability of someone ruining a perfectly good sandwich by adding raisins. The bond between Jack and the Orb of Avarice didn't just grant him power. It gave him knowledge, the memories and experiences of the heavenly demon himself, allowing him to ascend to radiant rank faster than even Lucifer windward. And when he did, he would devastate the Vizirian family, leaving the South in ruins and the world reeling. The novel had stated that Tiamat's claws had pierced his heart, but whether he had truly perished remained a mystery. The kind of mystery that usually ended with the villain returning at the worst possible moment, probably with a new coat and a thirst for vengeance. And now, here he was, the boy who would one day become the Hellflame Emperor, standing before me as just another student. A student pretending to be the perfect noble, all courteous smiles and polished manners. But beneath it was something far less civil. Jack Blaespout wasn't just dangerous because of his strength. He was dangerous because he knew how to wait. Jack had black hair and dark eyes like Jean Ashbluff, but that was where the similarities ended. Where Jean was composed, refined, the product of careful grooming and aristocratic polish, Jack looked untamed. His hair always slightly unkempt, his posture relaxed but carrying a weight of quiet authority. He had the kind of presence that made people step aside without realizing why, a primal warning wrapped in nobility. Because unlike most nobles, Jack wasn't playing a game. He was waiting for his turn. Jack approached with his entourage in tow. His dark gaze swept over our group before he offered a light bow, every movement precise, deliberate. "It's an honor to see your highnesses gathered here," he said smoothly. His tone was perfectly polite, but there was something else beneath it, an undercurrent of amusement, as if he found the whole thing mildly entertaining. His companions followed suit, bowing in sync. Cecilia responded first, her voice composed but firm. "Good to see you as well, Jack." She gave a polite nod, her expression perfectly schooled as she turned to acknowledge the others from Slatemark Academy. Her smile was warm but distant, cordial without ever inviting familiarity. Jack straightened, his gaze flicking between us before settling on Lucifer. And just like that, the air between them changed. There was no hostility, no outward aggression, just tension, the unspoken kind. The kind that hung heavy in the space between two people who knew they would spend their entire lives challenging each other. Lucifer inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "Jack." "Lucifer," Jack returned, lips curving ever so slightly, almost as if he was enjoying himself. Then his attention turned to me, and for the first time, I felt the weight of his gaze settle fully. "Arthur Nightingale," he said, voice carrying a note of intrigue. "It seems fate has brought us all together tonight." "Seems so," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Congratulations on leading the Slatemark Academy group. I've heard impressive things about all of you." Naomi Draven stepped forward at that, her eyes narrowing slightly despite the lingering smile on her lips. "Impressive? Flattery from a Mythos Academy student? I must say I didn't expect that." "It's not flattery if it's true," I said smoothly, offering a small smile. "You've earned your reputation." Jack's expression didn't change, but I caught the faintest quirk of his brow. He found this exchange amusing. Of course he did. To him this was all a game, a dance of words before the real battles began. Before anything could escalate, Cecilia spoke, her voice gentle yet firm. "Tonight is about celebrating, not competing. Let's put aside our differences and enjoy the festivities." Jack's gaze lingered on her for a fraction of a second longer than necessary before he nodded, his smile returning in full force. "Of course, Your Highness. We're all here to celebrate, after all." Luna's voice echoed in my mind, filled with something I rarely heard from her, disbelief. "Just who the hell is he?" she whispered, as if even speaking his name too loudly would make him more real. How is this possible? How can someone harbor so much malice?" Luna had lived for thousands of years. She had seen monsters, tyrants, and beings who defied the natural order. And yet, even she was unsettled, because what Jack carried inside him wasn't just ambition. It was something older, darker. The heavenly demon had once been a force of unparalleled destruction. And now, that force whispered into the mind of a boy already predisposed to malevolence. Jack Blazespout was one of only two people in the world capable of wielding both mana and miasma. The other was Rin Ashbluff, Jin's hidden twin sister, locked away because the miasma had corrupted her mind. The difference was Jack wasn't corrupted. Jack was in control, and that made him infinitely more dangerous. Simply put, Jack Blazespout was a character without redemption. And his fate was already set. The only end for him was death. But not today. Killing Jack now wasn't an option. His personal strength aside, he was the heir to Duke Blazespout, a noble with immense influence and resources. Any attempt to kill him would be suicide, and if I died, then everything I was working for would mean nothing. Jack too had limits. He couldn't yet wield the full power of his second gift, abyssal flames, a miasma-infused flame that had once belonged to the heavenly demon himself. If he revealed it now, it would mark him for execution. And yet, even with only nirvana flames at his disposal, he was in a league of his own. Lucifer and I were strong, close in ability, but we weren't there yet, not at his level. If we fought him now, we would lose. I shifted my gaze away from Jack and toward the group standing behind him. Leora Arundel, Tobias Grimfeld, Naomi Draven. And then, finally, my eyes landed on the one who interested me the most. Alara Astoria, the innocent daughter of Archduke Leopold Astoria, the spark that would one day set the Slatemark Empire on fire. In the novel, Alara's fate had always been a turning point, a moment of tragedy that shattered the stability of an empire. She had been my favorite female character, a symbol of purity caught in the ruthless games of power, a character who had always left me wanting to change the course of the story. And now she was here. I stepped forward. I was going to ask her to dance. Chapter 190. Alara Astoria, rank 5 of Slatemark Academy, was something of an anomaly. Support magic, the art of bolstering others rather than crushing enemies, was often dismissed as outdated. relics of a time when warriors needed healers in the backlands rather than energy shields and nanotech enhancements. Yet, despite this, Elara had dedicated herself to mastering it. Her magic wasn't the kind that made headlines. It didn't split mountains or tear open the sky. It didn't turn entire cities to dust or carve one's name into the annals of history. No, Elara's magic protected, strengthened, mended. Light, earth, wind, water, and space. Each one woven together in perfect harmony, allowing her to reinforce allies, manipulate battlefields, and ensure her team could fight harder, longer, and better than they ever could alone. It was a skill set that was underappreciated, but not by those who had ever fought beside her. Of course, her utter lack of offensive magic was a well-known flaw. She had about as much natural talent for attack spells as a fish had for mountain climbing. And yet, despite that, she was still rank 5 of Slatemark Academy, the second most prestigious academy in the world. A testament to how terrifyingly good she was at what she could do. She had earned her place through raw ability. That was something no one could take away from her. But Elara Astoria, for all her talent, was also, well, painfully kind-hearted. Some would call it naive, others simply a refusal to see the world for what it was. Raised by a father who doted on her after her mother passed during childbirth, she had been sheltered in ways she hadn't even realized. She wasn't spoiled, not by any means, but the world had always seemed a little softer to her, a little kinder. Perhaps that was why she struggled with places like this. She stood at the edge of the ballroom, hands neatly folded, eyes flickering from couple to couple as they twirled and spun to the rhythm of the music. The grand chandeliers above shimmered like starlight, refracting off the polished marble floors, casting an almost ethereal glow over the attendees. The room was a perfect storm of grace, elegance, and politics, and Elara, despite her best efforts, felt like an intruder. She had never quite mastered the subtle art of conversation, the unspoken rules of noble gatherings where every word was measured, where every glance carried meaning. The way people could glide from one conversation to another with effortless charm baffled her. It was overwhelming, it was exhausting, and it made her feel very, very small. Then Arthur Nightingale extended his hand to her. For a second, she just stared. This was Arthur Nightingale, the new rank 1 of Mythos Academy for first years. The boy who had defeated Lucifer Windward, the one everyone assumed would hold that title without contest. A boy who had no business asking her to dance. Her first instinct was to hesitate, her gaze flickering toward the imperial family. The crown prince was watching. The weight of his presence pressed against her thoughts, reminding her of all the unspoken expectations, the delicate balance of alliances and rivalries that noble families danced around like a house of cards. And yet, when she looked back at Arthur, his expression was unreadable. There was no hidden meaning behind the offer, no calculated move in some grand political game. Just an invitation. A simple "would you like to dance?" So she reached out and placed her hand in his. The moment they stepped onto the dance floor, the noise of the world seemed to fade. Arthur moved with practiced ease, his movements steady, his grip firm but not overbearing. He guided her effortlessly, allowing her to match his steps without fear of misstep. At first, she was stiff, overly focused on her footing, terrified of embarrassing herself. But Arthur was calm. He wasn't leading her into a performance, wasn't expecting her to dazzle or impress. He just danced, and in doing so, he made it easy for her to follow. "You dance well," he said, his voice light and easy, as if they were discussing the weather rather than gliding across the ballroom floor. Elara flushed, not quite believing him, but the sincerity in his voice made her want to try anyway. The tension in her shoulders eased. Her movements became smoother, more natural. She let herself get lost in the music, in the steady rhythm of their steps. She almost forgot the crown prince was still watching. Almost. Her gaze flickered to where he stood, expression unreadable. Anxiety curled at the edges of her mind, whispering doubts, warning her that she was stepping onto fragile ground. But then Arthur spun her gently, and when she met his eyes again, there was something in them that steadied her. It was just a dance, a moment in time, and for now that moment was enough. Cecilia watched Arthur dance with Alara, her fingers tightening ever so slightly around the stem of her glass. Annoying. That was the only word for it. Alara Astoria, the daughter of Archduke Astoria. Cecilia knew her well. Knew her far too well. She was Rachel all over again. Kind, warm, radiant in a way that made her impossible to shatter. Not because she was clever, not because she played the game well, but because she simply refused to be broken. It was infuriating. Cecilia could play with people like pieces on a board, twist them, mold them, break them if she wanted to, but not Alara. And now Alara was dancing with Arthur. Her Arthur. Cecilia exhaled through her nose, forcing herself to relax. I can't be like this, she reminded herself. Arthur won't love me if I act like this. Love required subtlety, patience, not unchecked possessiveness. She turned her head slightly, her sharp eyes landing on her older brother, Valerian. He wasn't even being discreet about it. His gaze was practically burning holes into Arthur and Alara as they moved across the dance floor. Cecilia's lips curled in irritation. Valerian, she said, her voice light but carrying an unmistakable edge. He flinched, then quickly masked it with a smile. Hey, Cecilia. A weak attempt at feigned nonchalance. Pathetic. She could read him like a book. If she could unravel Arthur's thoughts, Arthur, who was so frustratingly enigmatic. Then Valerian was as transparent as glass. You know, she continued, her tone almost